Hello again, I'm Paula Smith, jumping back in here live with a word attack practice activity for you. So, if you ever have trouble breaking longer words down into smaller pieces to make them easier to read and easier to spell, you'll want to listen in. I took today's word of the day, which is sycophant, and I have it here for you. And what we're going to do is break this down to make it a little bit easier to read. Now, you probably know that the letter Y has four different sounds. It can be long E, like at the end of penny. It could be I, like in sky. And it could be Y, like the consonant sound. So we have E, I, Y, and it can also be I, like in the word gym or gymnasium. So that's something to watch out for here. What we're going to be looking for first are anytime we have two or more letters that make one sound, and we're also going to watch out for the vowels because vowels have so many different sounds to them. As I just mentioned to you about the letter Y, which a lot of people say that Y is sometimes a vowel, but actually most of the time it's a vowel sound. When you see the letter Y in a word, it's probably going to represent a vowel sound more often than the consonant sound, which is ya. Okay, so back to those pairs of letters that make one sound. You probably notice that we have, well, let me get a different color here. Okay, so we have PH for that F sound in there. And then if you didn't know this word already, you would have to make a decision on what sound to make for the letter Y, for the O, and for the A, because there's so many different sounds that they have. But what you need to do is try something. Okay, so what we do is you'll try different sounds, but we're going to try them in the order that they're most likely represented. So I'm going to take just a moment here and make sure that everything's working just right here. There we go. All right. I thought you weren't able to see me. All right. So with this word, what we would do is we'd start sounding out until we think we have a chunk. A chunk is part of a vowel sound or part of a word that has one vowel sound in it. Since the Y is the second letter and not the first letter, we're going to try a vowel sound. Normally, the letter Y isn't that consonant sound unless it starts a word. Not always, but normally. So we need to choose one of those vowel sounds. So we could go with I or E or I. I is the least common sound that the Y represents, but obviously that's the one that is here. It is an I sound in this one, but if you don't know, you have to try something. So let's just try E first. And you start sounding it out. Seek, seek. Okay, that sounds like a chunk, so we're going to put a line right in here. And then we're going to go to the next chunk. All right, so we're going to sound out until we think we have a chunk. And a chunk can be just a vowel sound. It doesn't have to be a vowel and consonants too. It can just be a vowel. So we're going to try a sound here. Let's try just because O can be an sound quite often. And even if it should be pronounced with an I or an O sound, a lot of times we speak so quickly and sloppily that it ends up turning into an sound anyway. So I like to try first if we don't know what the sound is. All right, so next up, we're going to push those two chunks together. We have sika, or sorry, we tried E first, right? So we would go sika, and then we're going to start sounding out on this side of the line. We're not going to try and push all this together and keep sounding out. We're doing one chunk, blend it together. One chunk, blend those two chunks together, then sound out the next chunk. So we have f, a, n, t, fant, fant. Now we're going to put those chunks together. So we had sycophant, sycophant. That doesn't really sound like a word we know. And at this point, if this really doesn't sound like anything familiar to you at all, this might be a time to look it up in the dictionary and look how to pronounce it, or go to an adult helper. Since this is probably a vocabulary word for you. This is about 11th grade vocabulary word. But we can still try some other sounds. Maybe this is a word that you've heard before. You're just trying to get it figured out. All right, so let's try changing some sounds here. Let's try an I sound now. So now that changes this whole chunk to sick instead of seek. And then you keep everything else the same. So we'll just try it out with this new sound here. Sycophant, sycophant. And maybe if you were familiar with this word, you probably would have figured it out at that point. And you would have just automatically changed this to an sound. or an S sound. Sycophant. Right? So we don't necessarily pronounce it fant, sycophant. It's more like a schwa sound, like an E or an sound, depending on how you pronounce it. So that's what we have to do. A little bit of trial and error with those vowels. But what's important is the skill that we used right here of changing this vowel sound without changing the rest of the chunk. That's called phoneme manipulation. We took this one sound, which is a phoneme, and we just switched it out without having to sound out this whole chunk all over again. Now, if you have trouble changing that vowel sound out in the middle, then that's a skill that you want to work on, is auditory processing or phoneme manipulation, where you can just change one piece so that you can make a new word with it. You can always come out and try some of my vocabulary classes or my reading classes on outschool.com. But I also am offering a 12-week boot camp starting November 4th, where we're going to be using accelerated reader and these word attack skills and special endings and even some spelling lessons all together to help you get on grade level really fast. So if you have any questions about that, make sure you send me a message and I'll be happy to help you with that. I'll catch you on the next live stream. Thanks for jumping in. Bye.